Podcast.
Welcome to our weird world. I am your host, John Henson, and I'm full of wings right now. And my body, here's the thing, you guys. I used to eat a lot of wings. I don't get to do that anymore. For a variety of reasons, namely because everything's more expensive now. And it's crazy how chicken wings in and of themselves used to be considered scraps. Like they were the least desirable part of the chicken, even beneath like the livers and the gizzards. And yet now it is multi-billion-dollar industry. And them things are expensive, right? Like the fact that you got to pay more than $1 per wing section, not even whole wing, like half of a wing. You know, a drum or a flat, not both, not 50 cents per to equal a full dollar, but basically $2 per wing. Is anything more than that's ridiculous, right? Even $1 per drum or flat is ridiculous, but that's that. And then of course, like I'm not a puss, man. Like I get them hot, all right? Or at least some form of like, I like that gold sauce that they're doing now. I don't know what they're putting in it, but it's pretty good. All right. It's like a buffalo honey mustard kind of deal going on. It's great. It's really good. But I don't eat as many spicy foods as I used to, despite my collection of hot sauces in the fridge. But my body's going to revolt on me here. So we're playing a little game today of can I make it through this recording without pausing to go to the bathroom? So we are, because you needed to know that, we are continuing our spooky paranormal theme topics from October because there's so many stories about aliens. I have 2 versions of my 100 story series just dedicated to paranormal stuff. And the majority, I think, of the stories in there are just people who think they saw aliens or got abducted by aliens. And so we're going to cover 5 more of those stories today. We're looking at the Washington Flap, the Shag Harbour incident, a sighting in Aztec, New Mexico, and then the stories of Frederick, Valentich, and our first story of Thomas Mantell.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
Thomas Mantell was born on June 30th, 1922 in Franklin, Kentucky. He grew up to fight in World War II and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions during Operation Market Garden, a large mission in the Netherlands that was designed to kind of create an Allied invasion route into northern Germany. Question. I don't know, military. Why do operations have to have these silly names? You know, like why are we branding our military operations, right? Like all of and I don't know if it's like just an American thing or if it's just like a worldwide military thing, but like we had Operation Enduring Freedom, brah, screech, brah, whatever. Like, who cares what the name of the operation is? Let's just tell the people that we went in there and we messed them all up. Like, we just massacred, which is what Americans do. We go in and we massacre foreign nations. And we paint ourselves as the hero, but we cause so much death and destruction because we're secretly the bad guys. I don't know if you know this or not. We're the bad guys. And so we're going to get what's coming to us one of these days. All right. Look, we're not always the bad guy. All right. We were the good guys sometimes. But for the most part, we're the bad guys. All right. Ask the natives. and the Filipinos and the Latin Americans and probably some other people. Probably the British, depending on what generation you ask. Anyway, it's not the point. Thomas Mantell. Oh, here's the thing. I'm recording this at the end of the day. All right. I am tired and I'm full. And there's just a lot of different things going on inside my body right now. Like I have a lot of caffeine from the sweet tea that I'm drinking out of this half-gallon jug because I make great decisions. I've got a belly full of wings, and I'm also tired and stressed out from work today. And all of that has given me a real devil-may-care kind of attitude, more so than normal towards recording this episode. So I don't know what other kind of nonsense I'm going to say in this episode, but I am dead clean sober. All right, I want to get that out of the way. This is just me going full tism in front of a microphone while no one is home in my house. So that being said, let's reset because I started this story 3 minutes ago and I'm like 4 sentences in. God dang it, man. Sweet tea, it's brown Kool-Aid. Don't get it twisted. Sweet tea is brown Kool-Aid, but God, it's so good. Like, what? Kool-Aid's okay. Kool-Aid is like the zebra stripes or the fruit stripe gum of powdered drinks. It tastes great for like the first second it hits your tongue, and then it all goes away. All of the flavor goes away. Sweet tea, though, man, it stays with you. It just, God, it's so good. Anyway, back to the story. Thomas Mantell, he served in World War II. And then after the war, he returns to Kentucky and joins the Kentucky Air National Guard as an F-51D Mustang pilot in the 165th Fighter Squadron. The F-51D Mustang, an early jet of some sort. They don't make them anymore because they're not as good as the jets we have now. Anyway, on January 7th, 1948, the Kentucky Highway Patrol called Fort Knox to report a strange object in the sky near Madisonville in the western part of the state. A few minutes later, more reports began coming in from other towns like Owensboro and Irvington. Just before 2 p.m. that day, Sergeant Quentin Blackwell saw this object that was being reported from his control tower in Fort Knox. It was white. There was a red kind of border around the bottom of it, and it was at least a quarter of the size of a full moon. So imagine a full moon up in the sky and then like a fourth of that size. So that's pretty significant. All right. Full moon, you can see a lot. All right. You look at like just a quarter sized slice, or not a quarter sized slice, but just a quarter chunk of the full moon. You can see a lot. All right. So this isn't nothing. So 4 Mustang jets led by Mantell, who were already in the air, were sent to investigate. One pilot quickly dropped out and returned to base to refuel, leaving the other 3 pilots on this mission. Mantell then led the other 2 pilots as they increased their altitude to try to catch up to this mysterious object. Shockingly, though, whatever this was actually getting away from them, and the other 2 pilots, whose oxygen levels were getting low, stopped their pursuit at 22,500 feet. But Mantell, he kept going, and by the time he ascended past 25,000 feet, the plane's engines failed because air, and Mantell had actually blacked out from a lack of oxygen. Without anyone conscious to control the jet, he just began this like flat death spin back down to earth. His plane crashed on a farm near Franklin, Kentucky, near his hometown. And immediately, rumors began flying around as to what this mysterious object was. Some people thought it was a Soviet missile. Some people thought it was an alien spacecraft that actually shot Mantell's plane when he got too close. Other people later claimed that Mantell's body was actually found at the crash site full of bullet holes and that the plane's wreckage was radioactive, but authorities only found that his seatbelt had been shredded when he was pulled out. So none of these rumors were actually true. The crash, though, because all of these alien sightings had happened, and that was the whole reason that they scrambled to go investigate, Project Sign investigated this. We talked about Project Blue Book last week. Project Sign was the predecessor to Project Blue Book. They determined that Mantell had mistaken the planet Venus for something else, which is weird because you don't really see stars out at 2 p.m. In 1952, Project Blue Book was ordered to reopen the investigation and found that on the day of the crash, Venus hadn't even been bright enough to be visible in the sky because it was during the day. Anyway, instead, it was believed that Mantell had actually misidentified a United States Navy skyhook weather balloon, which was part of a secret Navy project at the time, and they had not told anybody what was going on. And so the Navy, according to the government, was just flying a weather balloon, and it freaked people out. Like that weather balloon that was flying from China all over the country last year. That, God, how bored were we as a society where we were all keyed in on the whereabouts of this Chinese weather balloon? Oh my God. Oh, they're spying on us. They're taking photos of what? Nebraska? Who cares? Like, there was nothing that weather balloon couldn't have taken a picture of that 100 other satellites in space haven't already gotten pictures of. What are we hiding? Nothing. All right? Or it was just a way for China to calibrate all of our TikTok apps so that we can make sure that we got a direct line to China and they can steal our data. That's clearly what it was. And Mantell saw aliens. Anyway, moving on. So dumb. In March 1948, 2 men, Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer, they're hanging out, and they watched as a strange-looking aircraft carrying 16 humanoids made a controlled landing in Hart Canyon a few miles south of Aztec, New Mexico. The 2 men noted that this craft was like 100 feet in diameter, and then they watched as, like, out of nowhere, immediately, the military just swooped in and surrounded the scene of this, craft's landing. Newton and Gebauer assumed that the military then confiscated this aircraft and took it to a nearby base for research. Soon after this incident, Newton and Gebauer began selling doodle bugs to various people in the oil industry, and these men claimed that these doodle bug devices were based on the alien technology that they had recovered from the scene of the crash and could find oil, gas, and gold buried beneath the desert. J.P. Kahn, a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle, was immediately skeptical of this and asked for a sample of the doodle bug material. The 2 men gladly provided one, and it was just like regular aluminum. It just like took aluminum foil and like shaped it, right? The next year, Frank Scully of Variety magazine published an account of this alleged incident in Aztec, New Mexico. Scully added that the craft had actually come from Venus and worked on, quote, magnetic principles, which probably doesn't even mean anything. He also noted that the humanoids inhabiting the ship ate concentrated food wafers and drank heavy water. I don't even know. Is heavy water like hard water? Which is a term I hate, to be honest with you, because hard water is ice. And that's not what people mean when they say hard water. I don't know, man. Come up with it. There's so many words in the English language. This is what this episode's going to be. This is just going to be me with my own little grinds my gears segment every time I come across a word or a phrase that I don't understand. The way that my brain works, and I hear the term hard water, and I know I'm smart enough to know that they don't mean ice, but I'm not smart enough to know what the hell hard water actually is. Oh God. Oh, my heart. I got to stop for a second. I'm getting worked up. Anyway, he also said that along with being working on magnetic principles and that the little aliens inside were drinking heavy water, he said that every measurable dimension of the craft was divisible by 9. You know what else is all divisible by 9? Threes. Okay. Gotcha. Anyway, 4 years later, True magazine exposed Newton and Giebauer's doodlebugs as a hoax, and the two men were convicted of fraud. Obviously. Ufologists and others who desperately wanted aliens to be real also discredited their story. But then 30 years later, author Leonard Stringfield came out and claimed that the Aztec incident was in fact real, and that it was one of several incidents at the time that was covered up by the military and taken to Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Why they couldn't just take it over to nearby Roswell or White Sands? They had to take it across the country to Dayton, Ohio? Okay. Okay, Leonard. Many people who claim to see the Roswell crash also said they witnessed the Aztec incident, even though the two towns are 400 miles apart. Some of these people claim that the Aztec craft was completely heat resistant but was damaged in the crash, even though Newton and Giebauer's original story claimed that it was a controlled landing, and yet they somehow recovered pieces of the aircraft. So the entire story is just full of holes at this point. The beings on this craft now, not only are they eating concentrated food wafers and eating heavy water, drinking heavy water, they were also reported to be roughly 3 feet tall and weighed about 40 pounds. I don't know how you know this information, Leonard, but he apparently did. In 2011, ufologists got this loosely connecting proof that they were looking for when the FBI released the Hottle memo, which contained a report from Agent Guy Hottle addressed to the director of FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, at the time. In this memo, Hottle retold a story that was then retold to a reporter for the Wyandotte Echo in Kansas City, Kansas, by a used car salesman and radio station manager that was related to the original hoax story in Variety magazine. So you know this is going to be legit. I don't know how many degrees removed we even are from the original person who told this story at this point. So, okay, let's work backwards here. So, a used car salesman and a radio station manager told a reporter from Kansas City, who then told it to this dude, this random dude, this FBI agent. All right. So 2 years later, after this memo came out, the FBI issued a press release on it stating that the Hottle memo didn't prove the existence of UFOs, even though ufologists were like, oh my God, it's proving it happened. There's aliens at Wright-Patterson. No, rather, it was a third-hand claim that they just never bothered to investigate because the original story had to do with these two dinglings who were just scamming people for fake oil and gas money. Ufologists did not care about this detail, and they continued to believe that the Aztec, New Mexico incident definitely happened, and that basically, Newton and Giebauer just, they saw it, and it totally happened, and then they used it as like a separate, unrelated fraud scheme. It's trash. Anyway, our next story here. At 11:40 p.m. on July 19th, 1952, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, which is either Reagan or Dulles now. I don't know which one it is, but who cares? Edward noticed 7 objects on his radar that definitely were not supposed to be there. Even more, they weren't flying in any kind of established flight path or in any way that a plane was supposed to behave. Nugent asked his senior controller and 2 others to look at his radar to make sure that he wasn't going crazy, and all 3 confirmed that the radar was working as it should. So, 2 other controllers, Howard Coughlin and Joe Zacco, also reported seeing unidentified objects on their radars and even claimed to see a bright light hovering in the sky before taking off at high speed. When the objects in the radar moved over the White House and the United States Capitol, the controllers called Andrews Air Force Base 10 miles away to see if they knew what was going on. The military, however, didn't see anything on their radar, but did report seeing an orange ball of fire in that direction. So, Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport, who reported this orange ball, noted that it looked as if it were standing still before making quick changes in direction and altitude on multiple occasions. Eventually, though, both radars at the airport and the Air Force Base began tracking an unidentified object before it vanished at the same time, just before 2 jets from nearby Newcastle Air Force Base arrived in D.C. The jets then circled the city for a couple of hours before leaving to refuel, at which point the objects returned to the radar. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, the objects then disappeared again and were never seen again. I said again twice there, and that bothers me. I should re-record that, but I'm not gonna. This story then hit newspapers all over the country the next morning. Project Blue Book immediately tried to investigate, but they were blocked by several military members. Eventually, radar specialist Roy James spoke with Project Blue Book and asserted that unusual weather conditions likely just caused blips in the radar. 1 week after this first event, a national airlines flight coming into Washington observed strange lights appearing above their plane. Both radars at the airport and Andrews Air Force Base tracked these objects on their radar, and a master sergeant at the base saw them with his own eyes, noting that the lights didn't have the same characteristics as like a shooting star, and they also moved faster than any meteor he had ever seen. Albert M. Chop, spokesman for Project Blue Book, quickly arrived on the scene and checked the radars himself. That's how common a lot of these UFO sightings are. They've just got, like, Project Blue Book just has dudes on standby to show up as soon as a report comes in so that they can, like, check it out and verify whether or not it's, and that's weird to me, right? Like, and listen, the government in the 50s and 60s was just so wild, such a wild time that I imagine they even had bought in to, like, the fact that aliens might be real, you know, like they're just in it like the rest of us are. They say all these things like, oh man, someone saw a sighting. You think they're coming this time? You think the aliens are coming this time? We're going to nuke them. Yeah. Get your arsenals ready. We're going to nuke some aliens and let's go investigate, make sure. And, like, that's all they did. They spent so much taxpayer money going out and investigating all of these sightings, who were generally just from crazy people super paranoid about an impending nuclear war. Anyway, by 9:30 p.m. that day, both radars were again picking up several unidentified objects in these airports around Washington, D.C. The objects moved slowly across the radar screen before then reversing directions and then moving at speeds that were calculated at 7,700 miles per hour, which is unfathomably fast, right? Like, I don't even think, like, space shuttles and rockets that we launch into space go that fast. 2 hours later, 2 jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base arrived back on the scene. One pilot saw nothing, but another pilot reported seeing 4 white lights and tried to chase after them. At that point, 2 more jets were scrambled and arrived after midnight. Again, one pilot saw nothing. The other saw a white light that vanished when he tried to get closer. As with the first incident the day before, the event made more national headlines. President Harry Truman called Lieutenant Edward J. Ruppelt Project Blue Belts. Blue Belts. I almost said Project Blue Balls, and that would have been one of the greatest outtakes and bloopers of all time, but I didn't. I caught myself. Edward J. Ruppelt, Project Blue Book's supervisor, and President Truman demanded answers. All right, President Truman, he's freaking out right now. He's already nuked Japan. All right, pretty sure Truman, yeah, Truman defeats whatever in the paper, right? I think that's what it was. Anyway. So dude's already just, like, going through it. He doesn't know what to expect next. This is a whole new world we're living in now. And he's demanding answers from Project Blue Book. Are there aliens? Are they coming? Do we need to get the nukes ready again? Ruppelt, he's still trying to figure out a completely different sighting that was going on at the same time in Lubbock, Texas, which we covered back in episode 135 in another alien episode. He's trying to figure out what's going on there. Truman's like, no, I need answers now. It's the Capitol. We've got to save the president, which is me. We got to save me. Anyway, Ruppelt, he believed that the sightings had been caused by a temperature inversion. And basically, we talked about that, I think, in last week's episode. And I didn't explain what it was because, to be honest, I forgot. But a temperature inversion occurs when a layer of warm air sits on top of a layer of cooler air on the surface, which I don't know, like, yeah, warm air rises. So of course, cooler air is going to be on the bottom, but whatever. It's the way that it sits or something. I don't know. It's the different. I guess it's how much warmer the warm air is than the cooler. Anyway, but it's this phenomenon that typically gives radars false returns because it's actually bending the radar signal so much, like, that it bends it on itself and like acts like things are showing up when they're not. So that was the explanation that was given. On July 29th, which was 10 days later, members of the Air Force held the largest press conference since World War II to address the growing number of concerns that aliens were invading Washington, D.C. Major General John Samford asserted that the sightings were simply meteors and temperature inversions, and he believed that there was no threat to national security and that nothing was actually wrong. Of course, people were disagreeing with that, because why would the military lie to us? Well, they've got all kinds of reasons. Well, Ruppelt noted that 2 members of the Air Force dismissed the temperature inversion theory, stating that there was a temperature inversion practically every night between June, July, and August that year, and that the blips on the radar only happened on a couple of nights. So basically, according to Ruppelt, these temperature inversions were happening on a daily basis, but it wasn't screwing with the radar signal except on these 2 nights. So that likely wasn't it. Even more, Ruppelt checked an astronomical chart and concluded that there weren't any bright stars in the sky on those nights that would have been mistaken for something else. Ruppelt also collected interviews from witnesses on the ground, one of which who said he saw a red cigar-shaped object fly over his house and on towards the direction of Washington, D.C. These reports, along with hundreds of other sightings since 1948, actually led to the formation of the Robertson Panel, which examined some of the most unexplainable sightings collected by Project Blue Book. The panel concluded that practically every sighting that Blue Book investigated was actually no threat to national security, and recommended that the government spend more time quickly debunking these sightings instead of investigating and trying to validate them. Following this recommendation, Project Blue Book actually scaled back their publication of sightings that had not been labeled as solved. Moving on now, 2 more stories left. On the evening of October 4th, 1967, Air Canada Flight 305 was flying over Quebec on its way to Toronto when pilot Pierre Charbonneau pointed out a strange object. There's a bug in here. He just flew in front of the computer screen. It was I have a bright white monitor with my notes on it, and I saw him fly and I missed him. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Pierre Charbonneau. He pointed out a strange object on the left side of the plane to his co-pilot, Bob Ralph. The 2 men then watched this object, which was an extremely bright rectangle with a string of smaller lights trailing behind it. And it was gliding parallel to their plane just a few miles away. And then suddenly a large explosion shot from the object, which did not seem to affect it at all. It didn't speed up or lose altitude or anything like that. And then 2 minutes later, it exploded again, and then this object just kind of faded into a blue cloud. Meanwhile, Captain Leo Howard Mercy was guiding the MV Nickerson near Nova Scotia, which is a ship, a little merchant ship. He's out near Nova Scotia when he saw 4 stationary blips on his radar. He looked out of the window in the general direction of the blips and saw 4 bright objects in the shape of a rectangle. He gathered his crew of 20 fishermen onto the deck, and they all watched this object hover in the sky over the water. Mercy then radioed into the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax for an explanation as to what it was, if they knew anything, but no one had any idea what was going on. Later that night, at least 11 reports came in that something had actually crashed into the water near Shag Harbour on the southwestern coast of Nova Scotia. Each report was similar, like they were all coming from different people, different places, but it was all kind of the same kind of explanation. A low-flying object with bright lights was seen heading toward the harbor. The object made a whistling sound like a bomb falling out of the sky, in cartoons, before then making a loud bang on impact. Within 15 minutes of the first report, Canadian police arrived at the scene and began searching for the wreckage. They then asked the Rescue Coordination Center if any planes were missing, but everything came back normal. Nothing was missing, like everything was accounted for. Local fishing boats were then sent into the harbor with the Canadian Coast Guard, but no one found any wreckage. The next day, every single commercial, private, and military aircraft on the Atlantic side of Canada and New England and the New England states was accounted for. So it wasn't a Canadian craft. It wasn't a United States military craft. Could have been a private company. But no one was missing anything, right? The Royal Canadian Navy organized an underwater search of the harbor to try to find the wreckage, but after 3 days of searching, nothing was ever found. The incident was officially listed as a UFO, and no one still has any idea as to what actually happened in Shag Harbour. It was probably just a meteor, though. More than likely, right? Probably, maybe, probably. Anyway, our final story here began on the evening of October 21st, 1978, when Frederick Valentich was flying a Cessna 182L over the Bass Strait between the mainland of Australia and the island of Tasmania. Never mind that it was a training flight and that Frederick had twice been rejected by the Royal Australian Air Force because he did not meet the educational requirements, i.e. he was too stupid. Never mind that he had twice failed all 5 exams required to obtain his commercial pilot's license. And never mind that he had gotten in trouble 3 times while flying already, once while flying into a controlled zone in Sydney, and twice purposely flying into a cloud, which is apparently very frowned upon. This was a man that could absolutely be trusted in an airplane as long as you don't take into consideration his poor record prior to that, right? Well, shortly after 7 p.m. on October 21st, Frederick radioed into air traffic control in Melbourne and told them that a strange craft was following him at 4,500 feet. The tower came back and said there wasn't any other known object at that height and in his vicinity, but Frederick was insistent that it was there. He noted that this craft, which was illuminated by 4 bright lights, I'm seeing patterns here, it passed 1,000 feet above him at a high rate of speed. Moments later, he then realized that this object was coming directly at him. And when the tower asked him to identify the kind of aircraft that was above him, Frederick responded by saying it was not an aircraft at all. And then seconds later, the tower heard what sounded like metallic scraping sounds over the radio, and then they lost all contact with him. An air, sea, and rescue was launched a short time later with a team consisting of current ships in the area, a reconnaissance plane from the Royal Australian Air Force, and 8 private planes searching a 1,000 square mile area. Nothing was ever found. Frederick and his plane completely disappeared. The Australian Department of Transportation was never able to determine the cause of the disappearance, but just assumed that Frederick was dead. Probably good assumption, right? Like he has Malaysia airlined himself off this planet. 5 years later, an engine flap washed ashore on Flinders Island, north of Tasmania. A brief investigation linked its possibility to the same Cessna that Frederick had been flying, but there wasn't a definitive connection. Several explanations were eventually offered, as you would expect, which included Frederick becoming disoriented and flying upside down, mistaking his own plane's lights for another, which, as dumb as he was, failing his exams and breaking all of the rules, totally plausible, right? Another thought was that maybe he just purposely committed suicide, or maybe he was faking the whole thing and landed instead at Cape Otway, roughly 150 miles from Melbourne. The latter would have made a ton of sense if he had actually resurfaced with his plane sometime later, but he never did. Joe Nickel from the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, he shows up a lot in these because he enjoys making people who believe in aliens feel like idiots, and I respect it. He argued that Frederick had been deceived by a tilted horizon, which is a sensory illusion that kind of resulted in Frederick putting the plane into a downward spiral before ultimately crashing into the ocean. Ufologists, who clearly have it right, they have all the answers, they believed that aliens either shot Frederick's plane down or just straight up abducted him, owing to quote-unquote reports from an area of an erratically moving green light and photos from a plumber on the coast who saw an object exiting the water near Cape Otway. And that's it. Part 7 of stories about alien sightings and such in the books. Let's That was pretty good. All right. Like we had a lot of detours. All right. A lot of parts of the road that got washed out. We had to go around, but we made it back. All right. We got back on our route. We got to the destination and everybody made it out okay. So let's recap and see what we learned.
What did we learn?
Number one, did aliens try to invade Washington, D.C. and be the plot of all of the movies ever? Probably not. No one knows what they were, but I probably wasn't aliens. Number two, if someone tries to tell you that there was an alien recovery and stuff got taken away from a crash site in Aztec, New Mexico, slap them in the face because they're wrong. All right. It was two guys who made up the story to defraud people of their money, but people just didn't want to let it go. All right. Aztec, New Mexico, I feel really strongly never happened. All right. And then number three, Frederick Valentich. Listen, I mean, I guess nothing really stops you from flying, but if you fail your pilot's exams 5 times, maybe take a hint that you're not going to be a good pilot and you're going to end up dead.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you. This episode's pretty good. All right. We're made up for it. But we're going to do one more round of alien stories. Going for the trifecta. 5 more stories next week. And then that's it. We're going to be done with the aliens for a while. 5 more stories of alien encounters. We're looking at the Menissus incident, the Rendlesham Forest incident, the Transin Province case, the Phoenix Lights, and the story of Granger Taylor. So that's it. I didn't even have to stop and go potty. So that's pretty good. That's it. Thanks so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast.